I had worn the veil for 3 years, and in 3 years not one person at the Iron Court had asked to see my face. That was the whole point of a veil, I supposed. People stopped wondering about a thing once they decided it was none of their business. The healers thought I was scarred. The kitchen women thought I was vain. The young warriors thought I was a widow in mourning, which suited me because widows were left alone, and I had grown very fond of being left alone. I was 22 years old, and I had built an entire life out of not being looked at. It was the night of the long frost ceremony, when the rule I had kept so carefully began, very quietly, to come apart. The great hall smelled of pine resin and hot iron, and the particular sweetness of mead gone slightly to honey. I stood where I always stood at gatherings, 3 steps back from the light, near the second pillar, close enough to the kitchens that I could vanish into them if anyone turned my way. I had a tray of cups in my hands. A serving woman with a veil is invisible twice over, which is exactly as invisible as I wanted to be. The Alpha King sat on the wolf throne at the far end of the hall, and I did not look at him. This was a discipline I had perfected. I knew the shape of him by now without looking. The way the hall arranged itself around his stillness. The way conversation lowered when he shifted his weight. The way every wolf in the room kept one ear angled toward the throne, the way you keep one eye on weather. King Halvar of the Iron Territories did not need to raise his voice. He had not raised it in the 3 years I had been hiding under his roof. He simply was, the way winter simply is, and the whole court bent itself around the fact of him. I knew one other thing about him too, though I had told no one, and intended to tell no one until I died. 3 years ago, on a road outside a burning village, a wolf the colour of wet slate had stood between me and the men who meant to take me, and had not asked my name, and had not stayed to be thanked. I had seen the shape of him for 4 heartbeats in the firelight before he was gone. I had spent the next 3 years making certain he would never see the shape of me. Because a king who saves a woman might want to know she lived, and a king who wants to know a woman lived might look at her. And a king who looks, really looks, the way his kind could, might recognize something in her that she could not afford for anyone to recognize. Not him. Especially not him. So, the veil, the second pillar, the tray. "You are doing the thing again," murmured Edelyn, the head cook, sweeping past me with a platter of roast fowl. "The thing where you hold still and hope the room forgets you exist." "It usually works." "It works," she agreed, "until the night it doesn't." She nodded once toward the throne and was gone into the noise. I did not look. I have said that, but I will tell you that the back of my neck had gone cold, the way it did sometimes in that hall, as though somewhere across all that firelight and laughter, a single point of attention had come to rest very gently on the place where I stood. I told myself it was the draught from the kitchen door. I had been telling myself that for 3 years. The herald called the court to order for the giving of the frost gifts, and I let out a breath, because the giving of gifts meant the giving of speeches, and speeches meant no one would be looking anywhere but the dais. I set my tray on the sideboard. I let my shoulders come down from around my ears. I allowed myself, in the safety of everyone's distraction, to lift my eyes for the first time all evening. He was already looking at me. Across the entire length of the hall, past the fire and the banners and 400 wolves with their cups raised, the Alpha King had turned his head and his eyes had found the second pillar. And they had found me. Behind my veil, as though the veil were not there at all. I looked away so fast the room tilted. When I made myself glance back, a heartbeat later, no more, he had turned to the herald and was listening to the recitation of the year's grain stores, with the grave attention of a man who had never in his life stared at a serving woman in a veil. His profile gave away nothing. His hands were still on the carved wolf heads of his throne, but I had seen it. And worse, far worse, I had felt the thing I had spent 3 years refusing to feel. A warmth, low and wordless, that did not come from the hearth. It moved through me once and was gone, and it left me gripping the sideboard like a woman on the deck of a pitching ship. I knew what that was. I had read enough, hidden enough, listened at enough doors to know exactly what that wordless warmth meant when it passed between 2 wolves across a crowded room. I just could not afford for it to be true. So I picked up my tray and I went into the kitchens. And I did not come out until the gifts were given and the fires were banked, and the hall had emptied of everyone who might have a reason to look at me twice. What happens next is the part of all this I still find hardest to explain. Even now, even from the other side of it. So stay with me. If this is the kind of story you came here for, the slow kind, the kind where the most powerful man in the world undoes himself, one small, careful gesture at a time, then settle in. And if you have a moment, follow along, because I promise you, the veil does not stay on. I only ask that you remember I had a very good reason for wanting it to. The anemone was on my windowsill when I returned to my room. A single white flower, the petals barely open, the stem cut clean. Anemones do not grow in the iron territories in the long frost. Anemones do not grow anywhere in the long frost. Someone had kept this one alive through a season that kills everything, and had carried it up 4 flights of the servants' stair, and had left it on the sill of a healer's apprentice who wore a veil, and had not left a note, because the flower was the note. I knew what kind of flower it was, because there had been one exactly like it, crushed and frozen, in the mud of the road on the night the slate-grey wolf saved my life. I sat down on the edge of my narrow bed and looked at the flower for a long time. Then I got up, and I closed the shutter. And I did not let myself cry, because crying was a thing women did when they had run out of other plans. And I was not out of plans yet. I was simply, for the first time in 3 years, badly afraid that he already knew. The next morning, Lady Sigrun Asketil decided that I was a problem. I should explain Lady Sigrun. She was the daughter of the king's most powerful vassal. She was beautiful in the way a drawn sword is beautiful, and she had spent 2 winters arranging herself near the throne in the patient certainty that Halvar would eventually look up, see her there, and conclude that marrying her would be both politically convenient and aesthetically appropriate. She was not wrong about the politics, she was only wrong about the man. And being wrong about a man is the kind of mistake that makes a certain sort of woman dangerous. She found me in the healer's quarters, grinding willow bark, and she did not bother with greeting. "You were watched last night," she said. I did not stop grinding. "I serve at every gathering, my lady. I am watched the way a chair is watched." "Do not be clever with me." She drifted closer, her fingers trailing along the shelf of jars, as though she might at any moment decide to sweep them to the floor. "The king looked at you. Across the whole hall, in front of the entire court, he looked at a faceless nobody in a kitchen veil. And I want to know why." I could not say. Perhaps I was standing in front of something he wished to see. Her hand closed around a jar. She did not throw it. She set it down very precisely, 1/2 inch from the edge of the shelf, where one careless elbow would send it shattering, and she smiled at me. and I understood that the jar was a sentence she had chosen not to finish. "Take off the veil," she said. "Let me see what is under there. A scar? A hairlip? Something that explains why a serving girl thinks she can hold the eyes of a king." "The veil stays on, my lady, by my own choice, which the king has never questioned." "The king," she said softly, "questions a great deal less than he should. That is becoming a problem for everyone." She turned to go and paused at the door and delivered the thing she had come to deliver. "There is to be a naming at the new moon. The whole court will attend. Every face in this castle will be uncovered before the king, so the pack may be counted true." She let that land. "Every face. Yours included. I have already spoken to the steward." She left. I stood very still in the cold green light of the healer's quarters, the willow bark forgotten under my hands, and I thought, with a clarity that surprised me, so it ends then. After 3 years, it ends at a naming, because a beautiful woman is jealous of a chair. I had 8 days. I will not pretend I spent all 8 of them being brave. I spent the first 2 of them trying to find a way to leave, but the passes were closed with snow, and a woman travelling alone in the long frost was a woman travelling toward a quicker death than the one she was running from. And besides, and this is the part I am least proud of, besides, there was a white flower on my windowsill that had not been there before, and I found that I could not quite make myself go before I understood it. On the 3rd day, the king sent for me, not for the veiled serving woman, for the healer's apprentice. There is a difference in a castle between the people who are summoned and the people who are simply used, and I had spent 3 years on the right side of that line. The summons came through Osric, the king's beater, a broad, quiet man who delivered it with the faint, apologetic air of someone handing you a letter he suspects contains bad news. "His Majesty has a wound that will not close," Osric said. "He has dismissed 3 healers. The master healer suggested you." "The master healer dislikes me." "The master healer," Osric said, "would like the king to stop dismissing healers." A pause, something almost like a smile. "He asked for the one in the veil, specifically." The back of my neck went cold again. I went because one does not refuse a king, and because, I can be honest now, because some reckless animal part of me wanted to stand in a room with him and find out, finally, whether the warmth across the hall had been a draught after all. It had not been a draught. His private chambers were warmer than the rest of the castle, and smelled of cedar and old parchment and the iron tang of a wound improperly tended. He was seated by the fire with his sleeve turned back, and there was a gash along his forearm, days old, angry at the edges. The kind of wound a man gets when he steps in front of something he should have let his warriors handle. I knew, the moment I saw it, how he had gotten it. There had been a boar hunt 4 days past. A young warrior had stumbled. The king had moved. The court had told the story as proof of his strength. No one had mentioned that the strongest wolf alive had taken a tusk meant for a boy, and had then let the wound fester rather than admit it existed. "You let this go too long," I said, before I remembered who I was speaking to. He looked up at me. This close, with no hall between us and no 400 wolves to hide among, the full weight of his attention was a physical thing, like standing too near a forge. His eyes were grey, wet slate grey. I had seen them before, for 4 heartbeats, in firelight, and I had spent 3 years pretending I had not. "So they tell me," he said. His voice was low and unhurried. "Sit, you are blocking the light." I sat. I cleaned the wound. He did not flinch, which annoyed me, because flinching would have made him a man, and not flinching kept him a king, and I needed him to be a man if I was going to survive being this close to him. "You wear a veil," he observed after a while. "I do. At my hearth, in my chambers, with no one to see you but me. The veil stays on, Majesty." I kept my eyes on the needle. By my own choice. I waited for him to command it off. He was a king. It was within his power, and well within his right, and Lady Sigrun had managed to threaten it out of me in under a minute in a healer's storeroom. I braced for it. He did not. "Then it stays on," he said simply, and turned his face back to the fire, and gave me the wound to tend in peace. Something happened in my chest that I did not have a name for, and did not want one. I tied off the last stitch. I bound the arm. I gathered my things to go, and I had almost made it to the door, almost, when he spoke again, not turning around, his voice very even. "There is a naming at the new moon," he said. "Lady Sigrun has been busy. Every face uncovered before the throne." My hand stilled on the latch. "I am aware, Majesty." "I thought you might be." A long pause. The fire popped. "Tell me, if a woman had a reason to keep her face her own, a good reason, a reason a king might understand, what would she have me do about a naming she did not ask for?" I did not turn around. I could not. If I turned around, he would see whatever was happening to my face through the veil, and I had not survived 3 years by letting anyone see that. "She would ask the king," I said carefully, "to remember that he never questioned the veil, and to go on not questioning it. That is all." The silence behind me went on a long time. "That is a great deal," he said at last, very quietly, "to ask of a man who has questioned nothing else in years." I left before either of us could say the thing the room had filled up with. I want to tell you that I spent the next days being sensible. I did not. I tended his arm each morning because he sent for me each morning, and each morning the wound was closing cleaner, and each morning we talked of nothing. The grain stores, the snow, a book he was reading and could not finish, a king's complaints, an apprentice's dry replies. And each morning I left a little later than the morning before. And each morning there was an anemone on my windowsill when I returned. I started to understand, slowly, the way you understand a thing you have been refusing to understand, that the flowers had been arriving longer than 3 days. I went back, in my mind, over 3 years of windowsills. There had always been flowers. In spring, I had told myself they blew in. In summer, I had not noticed them at all. I had been so busy being invisible that I had failed to notice the one person in the castle who had been, very patiently and at no small cost, seeing me the entire time. I found the proof on the 6th day, and it nearly broke me. I had gone to the king's chamber early, before he woke, to leave fresh bindings. Osric had let me in, then been called away. The fire was low. On the table by the window, where a king keeps the things he does not want his court to see, there was a wooden box, open, and in the box there was a ledger, and the ledger was a claim list. I knew what a claim list was. Every alpha kept one. The names of unmated women of the pack, eligible to be considered for the position of Luna, updated each season, pruned and added to by the beta and the advisors. It was a brutally practical document. It was, in many ways, the most powerful list in the territory. My name was on it. Not the veiled serving woman. My name, my true name, the one I had not spoken aloud in 3 years, the one I had buried with the girl I had been before the burning village. It was there, in the king's own hand, near the top, and it had been crossed out, and written in again, and crossed out, and written in again, the ink of different seasons layered over the same 6 letters, like a man arguing with himself across years. Beside the most recent entry, in the margin, in that same plain royal hand, 4 words. She does not know. I stood in the cold grey light of the king's chamber, holding a list with my own dead name on it, and I understood everything at once. The way you understand the shape of a room when lightning fills it. He had known, from the beginning. He had recognised me, perhaps that first night I served at his hall, perhaps before, and he had said nothing. He had not summoned me, not claimed me, not exposed me. He had let me keep my veil and my false name and my small invisible life, and he had asked nothing of me. And he had left a white flower on my windowsill through 3 winters that kill flowers. And he had crossed my name off his own list again and again, so that no adviser, no steward, no jealous lady of the court would ever think to lift my veil and find the woman the king's wolf had chosen on a burning road, and never stopped choosing since. He had not been hiding from me. He had been hiding me. From everyone, including, as much as he could manage, from himself. "You are not supposed to see that," said the king from the doorway. I turned. He stood there with the morning behind him, and for the first time since I had known him, the stillness had gone out of him entirely. The most composed man in the territory looked like a man who had walked into a room and found it on fire. "You knew," I said. The veil moved with my breath. "All this time? You knew who I was?" "Yes." "The flowers?" "Yes." "The list?" My voice did the thing I had spent 3 years preventing it from doing. "You crossed off my name. Over and over. For years. To keep you off it." He came no closer. He kept the whole width of the room between us, the way he kept 3 paces when 1 would do, and I understood now that the distance had never been coldness. It had been the most careful kind of restraint I had ever seen. If your name stayed on the list, someone would ask who you were. They would lift the veil. And once the court knew the king's wolf had settled on a woman with no rank and no name and no history they could verify. He stopped. His jaw worked once. "I made a vow, once, over a pyre, that I would never again let what I wanted cost someone their life. I have kept that vow for 7 years by wanting nothing." A long breath. "And then there was a girl on a road, and a flower in the mud. And I have been very bad at it ever since." I could not speak. The willow bark, the second pillar, the 3 years of careful nothing, all of it was rearranging itself around the single fact of this man who had loved me so quietly that I had mistaken it every single day for the absence of being seen. "Sigrun means to unveil you at the naming," he said, "before the whole court, to prove you are no one." His grey eyes held mine through the cloth. "I can stop the naming. I am the king. I can forbid it, and the court will obey, and you will keep your veil, and your name, and your safe, small life. Say the word, and it is done. I will go on questioning nothing." It was the kindest thing anyone had ever offered me. "Or," I said. He did not pretend not to understand. "Or you take it off yourself," he said, "in front of all of them. not because Sigrun forced it, not because the king commanded it, because you chose to stop hiding, and you let me stand beside you while you do it. A pause that cost him visibly. But that one I cannot give you. That one you would have to give me. I left without answering. I am not proud of that either. But there are some choices a woman has to walk away from before she can walk toward them. The naming fell on the new moon, as namings do. The great hall was packed to the walls. Every wolf of the Iron Court stood uncovered before the throne to be counted true. Faces bare, names spoken, the old ritual of a pack accounting for itself in the dark of the year. I stood in my place near the second pillar, in my veil, with my heart going like a hunted thing, and I watched Lady Sigrun work the edges of the crowd with the bright purpose of a woman about to win. She had dressed for victory. She had positioned the steward. When the counting reached the servants, she stepped forward into the open floor before the throne, and she raised her clear, carrying voice so that the whole hall could hear, and she said, "Majesty, one face among us remains hidden. The pack cannot be counted true while one of us refuses to be seen. The veiled woman must show herself, as the law requires, or be named outsider and put beyond the gates." The hall went very quiet. 400 faces turned toward the second pillar. I felt the king's eyes find me through all of it. I did not look at him. I had spent 3 years not looking at him, and I found that the discipline held even now when everything else had come apart. I thought about the offer. I can stop this. Say the word. Keep your veil, your name, your safe, small life. It was still there. He had not moved to take it back. One look from me and he would forbid the whole thing, and I would go back to being a chair. Watched the way a chair is watched, invisible and alive and alone. And I thought about a white flower on a windowsill in the dead of winter, kept alive through a season that kills everything, by a man who had wanted nothing for 7 years and had been, in his words, very bad at it ever since. I stepped out from behind the pillar. The whole hall watched me cross the open floor. Sigrun's smile widened. She thought she had won. She thought I was coming to be unmasked and cast out, and I let her think it for exactly as long as it took me to reach the foot of the dais and turn, not to face her, but to face the king. "By the law," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. "A face must be shown by the one who owns it. Not taken, shown." I looked up at him. "Is that the law, Majesty?" Something moved through his grey eyes, like sun coming over a ridge. "That is the law," he said. "Then I will show my own face," I said, "in my own time, by my own hand. And no one in this hall will touch this veil but me." And I reached up, and I lifted it myself. I will not describe my own face. I have told you I never do. But I will tell you what happened in the hall when I did it, because that is the part that matters. Nothing happened. To 400 wolves, I was a serving woman with an unremarkable face, and the great revelation Sigrun had promised them was a girl grinding willow bark. And a confused murmur began to move through the crowd, like wind through wheat. That is all? That is the secret? And Sigrun's face began, very slowly, to come apart, because the trap had sprung on nothing. But the king had come down off his throne. He came down the dais steps, in front of his entire court, in front of his advisers and his vassals, and the lady who had meant to marry him. And he crossed the open floor to where I stood, with my veil in my hand. And he stopped 1 pace away, and then, deliberately, so that every wolf in that hall would see it, and none could ever unsee it, he closed that last pace himself. "I know this face," he said. He did not lower his voice. He raised it so the walls could hear. "I have known it for 3 years. I have kept it secret because I am a coward who made a vow to want nothing, and I have wanted this woman every day since a road outside a burning village, and I am done." He turned to the hall, and the king of the Iron Territories, who never raised his voice, let it ring off the iron banners. "She is no outsider. She is the one my wolf chose before my mind could argue. If any wolf here would put her beyond the gates, he will have to put me there first." The silence after that was the loudest thing I have ever heard. It was Sigrun who broke it. "She has no name," she said, but her voice had lost its edge and she knew it. "No rank, no bloodline. You would make a serving girl your Luna?" "She has a name," the king said. He spoke it then. My true name. The one he had crossed off his list 100 times. The one I had buried with the girl I used to be. He spoke it gently, and he gave it back to me in front of 400 witnesses, and it landed in the centre of my chest like a key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for years. And I would make her anything she would consent to be. I felt the warmth move through me then, the wordless one, the one I had been calling a draft for 3 years. And this time I did not look away from it. I let it be what it was. The vow over the pyre did not release him easily. I want to be clear about that, because nothing that costs nothing is worth telling. When he reached for my hand, there in the firelight of his own hall, I saw the thing it cost him. Saw 7 years of grief surge up in him like cold water. Saw the old fear that wanting a thing was the same as dooming it. Saw him stand at the edge of his own vow, with the whole court watching, and have to choose, in front of all of them, to step across. I was the one who closed my hand around his. I held on while it shook. I held on while the grief moved through him, and broke, and let go. And his fingers tightened on mine hard enough to ache, and I did not let go. Because I had spent 3 years being good at holding very still, and it turned out that was exactly the skill this moment required. You do not have to want nothing anymore, I told him, quiet, just for him. You are allowed to want this. You are allowed to keep it. His grey eyes were too bright. I am out of practice. I noticed, I said. You are very bad at it. And the king of the Iron Territories laughed, a startled, helpless sound that I do not think his court had heard from him in 7 years. And the whole hall heard it. And something in the iron of the place came loose and warm. The kiss, when it came, was brief and certain and witnessed by everyone, and I will only tell you that it felt like the first warm day after the long frost, when you step outside and realise the cold that has lived in your bones all winter is finally going. Then he straightened and kept my hand in his and turned us both to face his court as one. The fallout was real, because fallout always is. Lady Sigrun's father withdrew his banners in a fury and had to be brought back to the table over a long, cold month of negotiation. A king does not humiliate a powerful vassal's daughter in open court without paying for it. And Halvar paid, in concessions and patience, and one tense season where the northern passes felt less sure than they had. Sigrun herself was not exiled. Halvar was not a cruel man. But she was sent to manage her father's distant holdings, stripped of her place at court, which, for a woman who had built her whole self out of nearness to the throne, was its own kind of exile. The court whispered for a season about the Luna who had been a serving girl. Some of them whisper still. I have found I do not mind. It is 6 months later now, as I tell you this. The anemones still arrive on my windowsill, though I live in the king's chambers now, and the windowsill is a great deal grander than the narrow one where they used to appear. He still will not admit he leaves them. I have caught him 3 times, and he has denied it 3 times, with the wounded dignity of a man who thinks I cannot see the soil under his nails. And I let him keep the lie, because everyone is allowed one thing they protect. The veil is folded in a chest at the foot of our bed. I kept it. I am not entirely sure why. Perhaps because a woman should remember the shape of the life she chose to leave, so she knows the weight of what she chose instead. A letter came last week, from the village I was born in, from a woman who knew me before the burning, who had heard, the way news travels, that a girl thought dead these 3 years was alive and wearing a crown in the Iron Territories. I have not answered it yet. I will. There is no hurry now. That is the strangest gift of all of this, stranger even than the throne or the flowers or the man. But there is, for the first time in my life, no hurry. No road to run down, no face to hide. He found me at the window just now, with the unanswered letter in my lap, looking out at the snow. You are doing the thing again, he said, settling beside me. The thing where you hold very still and hope the world forgets you exist. It used to work. Did it? He did not phrase it as a question. He took my hand, the way he does now, easily, as though he had never once spent 7 years afraid to want anything. It never worked on me. I want that on record. Noted, Majesty. And he smiled, the new smile, the one only I and his court of 6 months get to see. And we sat there, while the snow came down on the Iron Territories, 2 people who had each spent years being very good at not being seen, learning, slowly and badly and together, how to stop. So tell me, did you see it coming? Did you guess, the way I never could, that the man across the hall had been looking the whole time? Stay a while, and tell me where you were listening from tonight. And if this is the kind of story that found you somewhere you needed it to, the kind where the most powerful person in the world undoes himself, very quietly, for the one who was never supposed to matter, then come walk with me through the rest of them. There are more. There are always more. This was only the night the veil came off.